Welcome back to Tina Romance Library, where powerful alphas fall hard, and the women they underestimate change everything. Every story here is complete, immersive, and emotion-driven. No cliffhangers, no rushed endings, just full romances you can sink into. So if you love possessive alphas, strong heroines who don't beg, slow burn tension, emotional payoffs, and stories that actually finish, you're in the right place. I need you to join the pack right now by subscribing. Leave a like if you enjoy immersive romance, and settle in because once the story begins, we don't stop until the ending. Now, let's get into it. I still remember the way my breath caught not from fear, but from something far more dangerous. The silk blindfold pressed soft against my eyelids, blocking out everything except the thundering of my own heartbeat. I couldn't see him, couldn't prepare myself. And maybe that's why, when his lips found mine, I shattered into 1,000 pieces I didn't know I was made of. It wasn't supposed to feel like that. I'd told myself 100 times that this moment would be sweet, gentle, the kind of first kiss you read about in fairy tales, where the prince leans in and everything just fits. I'd convinced myself that Prince Adrian, golden, untouchable, impossibly kind, was the only man who could ever see past what I was, past the whispers that followed me through the palace halls, past the fact that I had no rank, no title, nothing but a borrowed gown and a desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, I could be enough. But the second his mouth claimed mine, I knew something was wrong. Or maybe something was finally, devastatingly right. Because this kiss didn't ask permission. It didn't test the waters or tread carefully around my inexperience. It took. It commanded. It wrapped around me like a storm I had no hope of outrunning. And God help me, I didn't want to run. My hands found his chest broad, impossibly solid beneath my trembling fingers, and I felt the low rumble that vibrated through him. Not a sound. Something deeper, primal. The kind of thing that should have terrified me. Instead, I leaned in. I'd never been kissed before. Never been touched like I was something precious and devastating all at once. And standing there in the darkness, surrounded by the distant music of the masquerade and the pounding of my own pulse, I let myself believe the lie I'd been telling myself for weeks, that Prince Adrian had chosen me, that somehow, against every odd and every cruel word spoken behind jeweled fans, I had become someone worth wanting. But even as I kissed him back, clumsy and desperate and aching, a voice in the back of my mind whispered warnings I was too far gone to hear. Because this didn't feel like Adrian's practiced charm. This felt like hunger, like possession, like something wild had wrapped itself around my soul and decided it would never let go. His hand cupped the back of my neck, fingers threading through my hair with a sureness that made my knees weak. The other hand settled at my waist, pulling me closer until there was no space left between us. Until I could feel the heat radiating off his skin, smell the pine and smoke and something darker that I couldn't name. When he finally pulled back, I was gasping, unmoored. My lips felt swollen, my entire body humming with an energy I'd never experienced before. I wanted to rip off the blindfold, wanted to see his face, confirm what my heart already believed, that I was standing in the arms of the man I'd been half in love with since the moment he'd smiled at me in the palace gardens. But the rules of the masquerade were clear. No revealing. Not until midnight. So I stood there, trembling, as he pressed one more kiss to my forehead, tender this time, almost reverent. Then his warmth disappeared, and I was alone in the shadows, trying to remember how to breathe. I thought I'd been kissed by a prince. I didn't realize I'd been claimed by a king. The castle smelled like wet stone and wood smoke in the mornings, before the fires were stoked and the halls filled with wolves too important to notice someone like me. I'd learned to move quietly. Not because I was trying to hide, but because invisibility was a mercy when you were the only one in a palace full of predators who couldn't shift, who couldn't feel the moon's pull or hear the pack song thrumming through the bond that connected them all. They didn't say it to my face, not often, anyway, but I heard the whispers, saw the way their eyes slid past me like I was furniture. A mistake. a human girl raised among wolves, tolerated only because my mother had died serving the former queen, Charity, wrapped in a servant's apron. I told myself I didn't care, that I'd made peace with scrubbing floors and changing linens while girls my age were being courted, chosen, claimed by strong males who could give them everything I would never have. But peace is a lie you tell yourself at night, when the ache gets too heavy to carry into morning. The truth? I was lonely in a way that had no cure. I was polishing silver in the great hall when I felt that prickling awareness that lifted every hair on the back of my neck. I didn't have to look up to know he'd entered the room. Alpha King Darius had that effect. The air itself seemed to bend around him, growing heavier, charged with something I didn't have a name for. I kept my eyes on the candlestick in my hands, buffing away a smudge that probably wasn't even there. His footsteps were nearly silent against the stone floor, but I tracked them anyway. Across the hall, past the long table where visiting alphas would feast tomorrow night, stopping just close enough that I could feel the heat of him at my back. "You missed a spot." His voice was low, rough in a way that did absolutely nothing to steady my pulse. I glanced down at the candlestick, searching for imperfection, and found none. When I looked up, he was already walking away, his broad shoulders cutting a path through the morning light streaming in from the tall windows. No smile, no explanation. That was Darius, a man of few words and fewer expressions, ruling his pack with an iron will that nobody questioned. He was older than me by 8 years 30 to my 22, and he carried the weight of the kingdom like it had been forged into his bones. Dark hair, darker eyes, a jaw that looked carved from granite, and a presence that made grown alphas lower their gazes. He terrified me. Or maybe what terrified me was the way my heart kicked into a wild rhythm every time he looked at me. I forced myself back to work, ignoring the flush creeping up my neck. It wasn't the first time he'd done that. Appeared out of nowhere with some cryptic comment or unreadable stare. Last week, I'd been carrying a stack of linens up the servant stairs when Marcus, one of the younger warriors, had accidentally shouldered past me hard enough to send the whole pile tumbling. I'd been on my knees, gathering sheets, cheeks burning with humiliation, when Darius's voice cut through the corridor like a blade. "Marcus." One word. That's all it took. The warrior had gone still, his cocky grin vanishing as he turned to face the Alpha King. "Apologize. Your Majesty, I didn't." Now. The command in that single syllable made my stomach flip. Marcus had mumbled an apology, his face red, before practically fleeing down the hallway. Darius hadn't waited for my thanks, hadn't even looked at me, just continued on his way like nothing had happened. But I'd felt his attention, the weight of it pressing against my skin even after he'd disappeared around the corner. I didn't understand it. Didn't understand why the most powerful wolf in the kingdom seemed to notice when others overlooked me. Why his jaw tightened when he caught someone mocking my lack of a wolf. Why his gaze sometimes lingered on me during pack gatherings, dark and unreadable and so intense I had to look away before I did something stupid. Like hope, because hope was dangerous when you were nothing and he was everything. So I redirected it, channeled it towards someone safer, someone who actually smiled. Prince Adrian. Darius's younger brother was sunlight to his storm. 26, charming, with warm brown eyes and an easy laugh that made everyone around him feel seen. He'd spoken to me once in the gardens, asked about the roses I was trimming, complimented my work with such genuine kindness that I'd replayed the conversation in my head for days. He was the one I let myself dream about, the one who felt possible, even if it was still a fantasy. Not the Alpha King, who watched me like he was waiting for something I didn't know how to give. I finished with the silver and moved to the windows, wiping away the morning condensation. Outside, wolves were training in the courtyard, sparring, shifting, moving with a grace and power I would never possess. I watched them with the same longing I'd felt since childhood. That bone-deep yearning to belong, to be more than human, more than invisible. "You're staring." I jumped, spinning around to find Darius standing in the doorway. How long had he been there? How did someone that large move so silently? "I was just..." I gestured vaguely toward the window, my voice catching, cleaning. His eyes, God, those eyes tracked over my face like he was reading something written there, something I desperately hoped he couldn't see. "They're brutal in training," he said, moving into the room, closer. "You wouldn't enjoy it." I didn't say I wanted to train. The words came out sharper than I intended, defensive. His mouth almost curved. Almost. "You didn't have to." Heat flooded my cheeks. I turned back to the window, gripping the cloth tighter. "Was there something you needed, Your Majesty?" The silence stretched so long I thought he'd left without answering. Then I felt him, right behind me, close enough that his scent, pine and smoke and something wild wrapped around me like a living thing. "Yes," he said quietly. I waited, my breath shallow, but he didn't continue. And when I finally worked up the courage to glance back, he was gone. Just a whisper of warmth where he'd stood and the frantic beating of my own heart. I pressed my palm against my chest, willing it to slow. This was madness. Darius wasn't kind to me because he cared. He was an alpha king doing his duty, protecting those beneath him. That's what good leaders did. It didn't mean anything. It couldn't mean anything. I had to stop reading into his silences, stop letting my pulse race every time he entered a room, because in 3 days at the masquerade ball, I was going to dance with Prince Adrian, and maybe, just maybe, he would see me as more than the wolfless girl who trimmed his roses. That was the dream I could afford to chase. Not the dangerous, impossible pull I felt toward a king who looked at me like I was both a question and an answer he wasn't ready to speak out loud. Prince Adrian found me in the library 3 days before the masquerade. I was on a ladder, dusting the upper shelves where nobody ever looked, when his voice drifted up from below. "You know, most people would consider that dangerous without someone to spot you." I glanced down, nearly losing my grip on the feather duster when I saw him leaning against the doorframe. He was dressed for riding leather boots, fitted jacket that showed off his athletic build, and his hair was windswept in a way that somehow made him look even more handsome. "I'm careful," I managed, climbing down with as much dignity as I could muster while my heart tried to beat its way out of my chest. "I'm sure you are." He pushed off the frame and wandered into the room, fingers trailing along the spines of old books. But careful isn't the same as safe. I wasn't sure what to say to that, so I focused on straightening the cleaning supplies, hyper-aware of every movement he made. "I've been meaning to ask you something," he said, stopping in front of a shelf of poetry. "The masquerade. You're attending, aren't you?" My hands stilled. I'm working it, Your Highness." "Serving, Adrian," he corrected, flashing that easy smile. "And that's not what I asked. I don't think servants are meant to. Everyone's invited." He pulled a book from the shelf, examining it without really seeing it. "My brother's orders. The whole pack. It's supposed to be about unity or some such thing." He waved a hand dismissively, setting the book back. "Anyway, I hope you'll save me a dance." The words hit me like lightning. "A dance? Unless you're planning to spend the whole night in the kitchen?" His eyes found mine, warm and teasing. "That would be a terrible waste." Heat flooded my cheeks. "I wouldn't want to presume." "You're not presuming if I'm asking." He moved closer, and I caught the scent of leather and fresh air clinging to him. "One dance. That's all. What do you say?" What could I say? That I'd been half in love with him for months? That I'd replayed every kind word he'd ever spoken to me until they'd worn grooves in my memory? "I'd like that," I whispered. His smile widened. "Good. I'll find you." He left the same way he'd arrived, casual, unhurried, like he hadn't just handed me a dream I'd been too afraid to reach for. I stood there among the dusty books, pressing my hands to my burning cheeks, trying to convince myself this was real. Prince Adrian wanted to dance with me, sought me out to ask me himself. Maybe I wasn't as invisible as I thought. I didn't notice Darius standing in the shadowed hallway just beyond the library door. Didn't see the way his hands had curled into fists at his sides or the muscle ticking in his jaw. Didn't catch the flash of something dangerous in his eyes as he watched his brother walk away, whistling. If I had, maybe everything would have been different. But I was too busy floating to notice the storm gathering. The next 2 days blurred together in a haze of preparation and wild hope. I borrowed a dress from Marie, one of the kitchen maids who'd always been kind to me, simple but pretty, deep blue with silver threading. Nothing compared to what the noble she-wolves would wear, but it would have to do. I barely slept the night before the masquerade. Lay awake imagining Adrian's hand in mine, the music swelling, the moment when he'd look at me and see someone worth choosing. The fantasy was so vivid I could almost taste it. I should have known better. Should have remembered that girls like me didn't get fairy tale endings. The masquerade started at dusk. The great hall transformed into something magical with hundreds of candles and trailing silk in the pack, colors deep crimson and gold. Everyone wore masks, elaborate creations of feathers and jewels that made it nearly impossible to tell noble from servant. For once, I could blend in. I stood near the refreshment table, sipping wine I barely tasted, searching the crowd for Adrian's tall frame. The music was intoxicating, couples spinning across the floor in a blur of color and movement. My borrowed dress felt suddenly inadequate. My mask, a simple black thing I'd fashioned myself, felt cheap. There you are. I turned to find a group of she-wolves approaching, their masks glittering in the candlelight. I recognized Lady Celeste's voice, immediately sharp and sweet as poisoned honey. She was flanked by her usual companions, daughters of visiting alphas who treated the castle like their personal hunting ground. "We've been looking everywhere for you," Celeste said, linking her arm through mine before I could step back. "Come with us. We have the most wonderful surprise." Warning bells rang faintly in my head, but I ignored them. Maybe they were being kind. Maybe the masks had leveled the playing field enough that they could see past what I lacked. God, I was so stupid. They led me through the crowd, giggling and whispering, to a small alcove draped in shadows. One of them produced a silk blindfold burgundy. Expensive. The kind of thing that cost more than I made in a month. "It's a game," Celeste explained, her voice dripping with false enthusiasm. "All the eligible males are playing. You wear the blindfold, and if someone kisses you, you have to guess who it was. If you're right, you get to dance with them all night." My stomach twisted. "I don't think—" "Oh, don't be boring." Another she, Wolf Bianca, I thought, pressed the blindfold into my hands. "Everyone's doing it. It's tradition." It wasn't tradition. I'd lived in this castle my whole life, and I'd never heard of anything like this. But they were all watching me with expectant eyes, and refusing would mark me as even more of an outsider. So I took the blindfold, my hands trembling slightly. "That's a good sport," Celeste cooed. "Now turn around." I should have run. Should have thrown the blindfold back in her face and walked away. Instead, I turned and let them tie the silk across my eyes, plunging me into darkness. Their laughter felt sharper suddenly, more pointed. "Stay right here," Celeste instructed. "Don't move. And remember, you have to guess correctly, or the magic doesn't work." Footsteps retreated, whispers faded. I stood alone in the alcove, blind and exposed, my heart hammering against my ribs. This was a mistake. I knew it with sudden, crystalline certainty. I reached up to remove the blindfold, and then I felt him. The air changed, grew heavier, charged with something that made my skin prickle with awareness. He didn't speak, didn't announce himself, just moved into my space with the confidence of someone who had every right to be there. I held my breath, trying to identify him by scent, by presence. Was it Adrian? Had he found me? Was this his way of making the moment special? Please let it be him. A hand touched my waist, large, warm, possessive, in a way that sent electricity racing down my spine. The other cupped my jaw, tilting my face up, and then he kissed me. The world disappeared. Not gently, not carefully. This was a claiming, pure and simple. His mouth moved against mine with devastating sureness, coaxing me open, swallowing the small sound that escaped my throat. I gasped, and he took advantage, deepening the kiss until I forgot where I was, forgot the game, forgot everything except the way he tasted like whiskey and wildness and something darker I wanted to drown in. My hands found his chest, felt the solid muscle beneath expensive fabric, the thundering of a heartbeat that matched my own frantic rhythm. This couldn't be Adrian. Adrian was smooth, practiced, charming. This was raw, hungry, barely controlled. This was. He pulled back, leaving me breathless and aching, his thumb brushing across my swollen lower lip once before his warmth vanished entirely. I stood there, trembling, as laughter erupted from somewhere nearby. Oh my God, did you see her face? She actually probably thinks it was the prince. The blindfold was ripped away, and I blinked against the sudden light, disoriented. Celeste and her friends stood in a semicircle, their expressions gleeful with malice. "Surprise," Celeste sang. "The game was just to see how desperate you really are." But I barely heard her, because my eyes had found him, standing in the shadows just beyond the alcove. Darius, the Alpha King, watching me with an expression I couldn't read, his jaw tight, his hands clenched at his sides. And I knew with the same certainty that had flooded me during the kiss. It hadn't been Adrian. It had been him. The world tilted sideways. My breath came in short, sharp bursts as I stared at him across the space that suddenly felt both too wide and suffocatingly narrow. Darius stood perfectly still, but there was nothing calm about the way he watched me. His eyes burned with something that made my stomach drop, and my pulse spike in equal measure. It was him. The knowledge settled over me like ice water, dousing the warmth that had flooded my veins moments ago. The Alpha King had kissed me, not Adrian, not the charming prince who smiled and made me feel seen, the brother who barely spoke, who watched from shadows, who made me feel like I was standing on the edge of a cliff every time he looked at me. Celeste's laughter cut through my spiraling thoughts. "You should see your face right now. Did you really think—" "Enough. One word." Darius's voice cracked like a whip through the alcove, and every she-wolf went silent. He didn't raise his voice, didn't move. But the command in that single syllable made the air itself seem to shrink back. Celeste's smile faltered. "Your Majesty, we were just—" "Leave." The she-wolves scattered like leaves before a storm, their giggles dying in their throats as they hurried back toward the main hall. I heard Bianca's whispered, "Oh shit," as they disappeared into the crowd, but I couldn't look away from Darius. From the king who had just kissed me like he was drowning and I was air. We stood there, locked in a silence that pressed against my ribs. I should say something. Should demand to know why he'd done it, why he'd participated in their cruel game. But my lips still tingled from the pressure of his mouth. My hands still remembered the solid warmth of his chest, and somewhere deep in my bones, something had woken up during that kiss. Something that recognized him in a way I didn't understand and couldn't explain. I didn't know. The words scraped out of my throat, raw and uncertain. "I didn't know it was you." Something flickered across his face, too quick to catch, too complex to name. His jaw worked like he was grinding words between his teeth, deciding which ones to let free. "I know," he said finally. That was it. 2 words, rough as gravel, before he turned and walked away. Left me standing there with my heart in pieces and my mind spinning with questions I was too afraid to ask. I pressed shaking fingers to my lips, trying to understand what had just happened, trying to understand why it had felt like that. I fled the masquerade before Adrian could find me for that dance. Couldn't face him. Couldn't face anyone with my thoughts in such chaos and my body still humming with the memory of a kiss that shouldn't have affected me this way. It was just a kiss. A moment. It didn't mean anything, except I'd never been kissed before, and now the only kiss I'd ever had belonged to a man who looked at me like I was a problem he couldn't solve. I made it to my small room in the servants' quarters and closed the door, leaning against it as I tried to catch my breath. The borrowed dress felt too tight suddenly. The mask, I'd forgotten to remove it. I tore it off and threw it across the room, pressing my palms against my hot cheeks. This was wrong. All of it. Darius was the Alpha King. Untouchable. Unreachable. He probably kissed me out of some sense of duty, saw me standing there blindfolded and vulnerable, and decided to spare me the humiliation of being left alone. That's all it was. It had to be. Because the alternative that he'd kissed me because he wanted to, because something had driven him to claim my mouth with a hunger that still made my knees weak, was impossible. I was nothing. Wolfless. Human in a world of predators. And he was everything. I didn't sleep that night, just lay in my narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every second of those moments in the alcove. The way he'd touched my waist, first gentle, asking permission even though I couldn't see him. The rough pat of his thumb against my jaw, tilting my face up with a sureness that suggested he knew exactly what he was doing, and then his mouth. God, his mouth. I'd expected softness, expected the kind of sweet, tentative kiss described in the romance novels I sometimes borrowed from the library. But there was nothing tentative about the way Darius kissed. He'd taken my mouth like he had every right to it. Like he'd been waiting for permission he hadn't realized he needed. And the moment it was granted, even unknowingly, he'd claimed what was his. The thought sent heat pooling low in my belly, and I pressed my thighs together, confused by my body's reaction. I didn't want this. Didn't want to feel this way about a man who barely acknowledged my existence most days. Adrian was the one I should be thinking about. Adrian, who smiled and teased and made me feel normal. Not Darius, who made me feel like I was made of lightning and hunger and something wild I'd never be able to name. But when I finally drifted into fitful sleep just before dawn, it wasn't Adrian's face I saw behind my closed eyes. The next 3 days were torture. I threw myself into work, scrubbing floors that didn't need scrubbing, polishing silver that already gleamed, anything to keep my hands busy and my mind from wandering back to that kiss. But everywhere I went, I felt him. Not physically, Darius had made himself scarce since the masquerade. I caught glimpses of him in the distance, always leaving a room just as I entered, turning down corridors before we could cross paths. It was like he was actively avoiding me, and the rejection stung more than it should have. What had I expected? That one kiss would change anything? Still, his absence was somehow louder than his presence had ever been. I noticed things I'd trained myself to ignore before. The way conversations stopped when he entered a room, the respect bordering on fear in the eyes of wolves twice his size, the absolute authority he carried without effort, like gravity itself bent to his will. And I noticed other things too, smaller things, like how the kitchen staff always had enough supplies, even in lean months, because he made sure of it. How he'd instituted new safety protocols in the training yards after a young wolf had been injured. How he visited the pack's elderly every week, sitting with them for hours even though he had a kingdom to run. Darius wasn't just powerful, he was good. The realization twisted something in my chest. On the 4th day, I was carrying fresh linens through the east wing when I heard Adrian's voice drifting from an open doorway. Don't understand why you're being so stubborn about this. I slowed, recognizing the other voice immediately. Darius. Low and controlled, but with an edge I'd never heard before. There's nothing to discuss. Like hell there isn't. Adrian sounded frustrated. You've been impossible since the masquerade. What happened? Silence. I knew I should keep walking. Eavesdropping on the Alpha King was probably punishable by something horrific, but my feet had rooted to the floor. She thinks it was you, Darius said finally, and my heart stopped. Me. He was talking about me. What? Adrian's confusion was evident. The kiss. She thinks you're the one who kissed her. A pause. Then Adrian laughed, genuinely amused. And you're upset about that? Brother, I hate to break it to you, but that's probably for the best. You and her? The pack would never... Get out. The command was so cold, so absolute, that I heard Adrian's sharp intake of breath even from the hallway. Darius. Now. Footsteps approached the door, and I barely managed to dart around the corner before Adrian emerged, running a hand through his hair and muttering something under his breath. I pressed against the wall, clutching the linens to my chest, my mind reeling. Darius was upset that I thought Adrian had kissed me, which meant... What? That he wanted me to know it was him? That the kiss had meant something? Or that he was angry I'd been naive enough to think his charming brother would want someone like me? I didn't know, couldn't parse the meaning behind his words or his anger. But as I finally forced myself to continue down the hallway, one truth crystallized with devastating clarity. That kiss hadn't been nothing. Not for him. And God help me, not for me either. I'd spent days trying to convince myself it was a mistake, a moment of madness, something I could forget. But my body knew better. My treacherous, foolish body that still remembered exactly how his hands had felt steadying me when my knees went weak, anchoring me when I thought I might float away. His hands hadn't wandered, hadn't taken liberties. They'd just held me, like I was precious, like I was his. And that kiss, that devastating, world-tilting kiss that had reached inside my chest and rearranged something fundamental. I'd never been touched like that. Like I was both fragile and unbreakable. Like I was a question he desperately needed to answer. Whatever was happening between us, this strange, impossible pull, it wasn't one-sided. And that terrified me more than anything else. Because I was still wolfless, still nothing in the eyes of the pack, and he was still their king. I started seeing him everywhere. Not physically, Darius was still avoiding me like I carried a plague. But I felt his eyes on me constantly, a weight I couldn't shake no matter where I went or what I was doing. In the great hall during the evening meal, I'd be pouring wine for visiting dignitaries, and the hair on the back of my neck would stand up. I'd glance toward the high table, and sure enough, there he'd be, not looking at me. Never, obviously, but his jaw would be tight, his shoulders tense, and I knew somehow, I just knew that he'd been watching moments before. It was maddening. In the kitchens, I'd be elbow-deep in dishwater, and Marie would elbow me. "The king's in the doorway again," she'd whisper, barely suppressing a grin. "Third time this week." I'd turn, heart already racing, but he'd be gone. Just a lingering trace of pine and smoke, and the cook muttering about how His Majesty had never taken such an interest in kitchen inventory before. I told myself I was imagining it, that the kiss had scrambled my brain and now I was seeing significance where there was none. But then, small things started happening. Strange things. The guard rotation changed. Instead of old Marcus, who'd made it his personal mission to make my life difficult, I suddenly had Thomas assigned to the servants' wing. Thomas, who was professional and courteous and had never so much as smirked at my wolfless status. When I asked him about it, he just shrugged. Orders from the top. My work assignments shifted too. I was pulled from the grueling early morning shifts in the laundry and instead found myself doing lighter tasks, arranging flowers in the main halls, dusting the library, things that kept me visible but not exhausted. "Someone's looking out for you," Marie said one afternoon, wiggling her eyebrows suggestively. "Don't be ridiculous," I muttered, but my cheeks burned. The most confusing moment came on a particularly cold evening, when I'd been sent to deliver fresh linens to the guest wing. The hallways were freezing, the fires hadn't been lit yet, and I was shivering in my thin servant's dress, arms full of heavy sheets. I turned a corner and nearly collided with a solid chest. "Careful." Darius's hands shot out to steady me, catching my elbows before the linens could tumble to the floor. The touch sent electricity racing up my arms, and I jerked back instinctively. His hands fell away immediately, but his eyes tracked over my face with an intensity that made my breath catch. "You're freezing," he said, voice rough. "I'm fine." The words came out sharper than intended, defensive, just delivering, but he was already shrugging out of his cloak thick, lined with fur, radiating his body heat. Before I could protest, he draped it around my shoulders. The weight of it settled over me like a claim, smelling so strongly of him that my knees went weak. "Your Majesty, I can't." "You can." He stepped back, putting careful distance between us. "Return it when you're done." Then he was gone, leaving me standing there wrapped in his warmth, my heart thundering against my ribs. I wore that cloak for the rest of my shift, even after the fires were lit and the halls grew warm. Couldn't bring myself to take it off. And when I finally returned it the next morning, folded neatly, left with one of his attendants, I mourned the loss of it like something vital had been ripped away. This was torture. Pure, exquisite torture. And it got worse when Adrian started seeking me out again. He found me in the gardens 2 days later, trimming back the rose bushes for winter. I didn't hear him approach until his shadow fell across the flowers. "There you are. I've been looking for you." I glanced up, shears in hand, trying to ignore the way my stomach twisted. Adrian was smiling easy, charming, completely oblivious to the chaos his brother had created in my head. "Your Highness." I set down the shears and wiped my hands on my apron. "Is there something you need?" "Adrian," he corrected for the 100th time. "And yes, actually, I owe you a dance." My heart skipped. "What?" "The masquerade. I promised you a dance, and then you disappeared." He moved closer, hands in his pockets, head tilted in that boyish way that used to make me melt. "So I'm here to collect. Or rather, to let you collect." "I don't understand." "There's a small gathering tonight. Nothing formal. Some of the younger pack members are getting together in the East Gardens for music and dancing. Come with me." It was exactly what I'd wanted 2 weeks ago. Adrian, asking me to spend time with him, offering me a glimpse of the life I'd dreamed about. So why did it feel wrong? "I'm not sure that's appropriate," I said carefully. "I'm supposed to be working. I'll clear it with the staff master." He reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear, and I froze. The gesture was casual, friendly. Nothing like the devastating intensity of Darius's touch. Nothing like the way the king had held my face like I was something sacred. "Say yes," Adrian prompted, his smile widening. "I promise I'm an excellent dancer." "She's working." The voice came from behind me, low and edged with something dangerous. I spun around to find Darius standing at the garden entrance, and the expression on his face made my blood run cold and hot simultaneously. He looked furious. No, not furious. Furious was too simple a word for the barely leashed violence in his eyes as he stared at his brother's hand, still raised near my face. Adrian dropped his hand immediately, but his easy smile didn't falter. "Brother, I was just inviting. I heard what you were doing." Darius's gaze cut to me, and I felt the impact of it like a physical blow. The East Wing needs to be prepared for the arriving delegates. All servants are required. It was a lie. We both knew it was a lie. The delegates weren't arriving for another 3 days. But Adrian just shrugged. "Another time, then." He shot me one more smile before heading back toward the castle, whistling like he hadn't just witnessed his brother nearly combust with jealousy. Because that's what it was. Jealousy. Raw and possessive, and completely unmistakable. Darius and I stood in the garden, the autumn air sharp with the scent of dying roses and unspoken words. He hadn't moved from the entrance, but I could feel the tension radiating off him in waves. "There are no delegates coming," I said quietly. His jaw ticked. "No." "Then why?" "Because he shouldn't be touching you." The words came out rough, dragged from somewhere deep. "He shouldn't be looking at you like that. Shouldn't be making promises he has no intention of keeping." My breath caught. "You don't know what his intentions are." "I know my brother." His eyes finally met mine, and the intensity there stole whatever argument I'd been forming. "I know exactly what his intentions are, and you deserve better than to be another one of his passing fancies." The words should have stung, should have felt like an insult. Instead, they felt like protection. "Why do you care?" The question escaped before I could stop it. "Why do you care what Adrian does or doesn't promise me?" Darius went very still. For a long moment I thought he wouldn't answer, that he'd turn and walk away like he always did, leaving me with more questions than answers. But then he moved, crossed the garden in 3 long strides until he was standing close enough that I had to tilt my head back to meet his eyes. "You really don't know?" His voice was barely above a whisper, but it hit me like thunder. I shook my head, not trusting my voice. His hand came up slowly, giving me time to pull away, and his fingers brushed along my jaw. The same place he'd touched during that kiss, the same devastating gentleness that had unmade me completely. "I thought I could stay away," he said, thumb tracing the curve of my cheekbone. "Thought I could let you believe it was Adrian, let you chase that safe, easy dream instead of this." "This?" I barely recognized my own voice. "This." His other hand settled at my waist, and even through the layers of fabric, I felt branded by his touch. Whatever this is between us. Whatever started the moment I kissed you and realized I'd been lying to myself for months about what you mean to me. The world tilted. I don't understand. I know. He leaned down, resting his forehead against mine, and I stopped breathing altogether. I know you don't, and maybe that's better. Maybe you should keep believing that I'm just the cold, distant king who barely knows you exist. But that's not true. The words tumbled out, urgent and confused. You've been protecting me, watching me. I've felt it. I have. He pulled back just enough to look at me, and the raw honesty in his expression made my chest ache. I've been protecting you from everyone, including myself. Why? Because you're wolfless. The words were gentle but devastating. Because the pack would never accept you as... He stopped, jaw clenching. It doesn't matter. What matters is that you deserve someone who can give you everything. Someone like Adrian, who doesn't have to answer to pack law and tradition. I don't want Adrian, I whispered, and the truth of it shocked me as much as it seemed to shock him. His hands tightened on me. Don't say that. Why not? It's true. I thought I did. I thought he was safe and kind and everything I should want. But then you... I broke off, frustrated by my inability to articulate the chaos inside me. Then you kissed me, and everything changed. It can't change. But even as he said it, his thumb was stroking along my jaw, his body leaning into mine like he was helpless against the pull. Then why are you still touching me? The challenge came out breathless. For a moment, I thought he might close the distance, might kiss me again right here in the garden where anyone could see. Instead, he released me abruptly, stepping back like I'd burned him. Go inside, he said, and his voice had returned to that cold, controlled tone I'd heard him use with visiting alphas. The East Wing does need preparation, and you're expected to help. The dismissal hit like a slap. I stared at him, hurt and confused and angry at myself for being either. Yes, Your Majesty, I said, putting as much ice into the words as I could manage. I turned and walked toward the castle, refusing to look back even though I felt his eyes on me the entire way. But I'd seen something in that moment before he'd pulled away. I'd seen the truth he was trying so desperately to hide. Darius didn't want to stay away from me. He was forcing himself to, and that changed everything. The cruelty had been building for weeks. Little things at first. A foot extended to trip me in the hallways. Wine accidentally spilled on the linens I'd just washed. Whispered comments about Wolf. Less trash just loud enough for me to hear. I'd learned to keep my head down, to move through the castle like a ghost, invisible and untouchable. But invisibility only works when people want to ignore you. And Celeste and her pack of she-wolves had decided they were done ignoring me. It started in the servants' corridor 3 days after my conversation with Darius in the garden. I was carrying a stack of folded tablecloths for the evening meal when Celeste appeared at the end of the hallway, flanked by Bianca and 2 other nobles whose names I'd never bothered learning. The predatory gleam in their eyes made my stomach drop. Well, Celeste's voice dripped with false sweetness. If it isn't the little human who thinks she can catch a prince. I tried to step around them, but they moved to block my path. Excuse me, I said, keeping my voice steady. I have work to do. Work? Bianca laughed, the sound sharp and cutting. Is that what you call throwing yourself at Prince Adrian? Because from where we're standing, it looks a lot more like desperation. Heat flooded my cheeks, but I refused to rise to the bait. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't you? Celeste moved closer, and I caught the scent of expensive perfume mixed with something darker. Malice. The entire castle is talking about how you've been following him around like a lost puppy. It's pathetic. I haven't been. And the king. Bianca cut me off, her eyes narrowing. I've noticed how he watches you, how he rearranged the guard rotation, how he gave you his cloak. She leaned in, voice dropping to a vicious whisper. Did you think we wouldn't notice? My heart kicked against my ribs. I don't know what you think you saw. We saw everything. Celeste's smile turned cruel. And we're done watching some wolfless nobody try to climb above her station. The tablecloths were ripped from my arms and thrown to the floor. Before I could react, Hands shoved me hard against the wall. My head cracked against stone, and stars exploded across my vision. "You need to learn your place," Celeste hissed. I tried to push back, but there were too many of them. Hands grabbed my arms, my hair, dragging me away from the servants' wing toward the back corridors of the castle. "Stop, let me go." "Shut up." Someone's hand clamped over my mouth. Terror spiked through me as they hauled me through a service exit and into the gardens. Not the manicured roses where I'd stood with Darius, the wild section that backed onto the river. The freezing, rushing river that had already claimed 2 lives this season. "No." The word came out muffled against the palm pressed to my lips. I thrashed, kicked, tried desperately to break free. But they were wolves. Strong, fast, merciless. And I was nothing. They dragged me to the edge of the embankment where the ground dropped away steeply into churning water. The river was swollen from recent rains, dark and violent and absolutely lethal. "Maybe a little swim will cool off your delusions," Celeste said, and shoved. I went over the edge. The last thing I heard was their laughter before I hit the water, and the world exploded into ice and chaos. The cold was a living thing. It seized my lungs, stole my breath, wrapped around my limbs like chains. I tried to scream, but water rushed into my mouth, choking me. The current grabbed me, pulling me under, spinning me until I didn't know which way was up. I fought, kicked toward what I hoped was the surface. My head broke through for one precious second, and I sucked in air before going under again. This was it. This was how I died, drowned in a river while she-wolves laughed on the bank. My vision started to darken. My limbs grew heavy. The cold didn't hurt anymore. It felt almost warm now, almost welcoming. I stopped fighting, and then something massive hit the water beside me. An arm locked around my waist, iron strong and absolutely unyielding. I was hauled upward with such force that we broke the surface together, and I heard a sound that cut through the roaring in my ears. A roar, primal and full of such rage that it didn't sound human. Darius. He dragged me to the bank, moving through the current like it was nothing, like the water itself wouldn't dare defy him. My fingers clutched weakly at his soaked shirt, my body shaking so violently I couldn't control it. We hit the shore, and he lifted me out of the water like I weighed nothing. Through my blurred vision, I saw Celeste and the others still standing there, their faces gone white with terror. "Run." Darius's voice was barely recognizable. Deep, guttural, threaded with his wolf in a way that made the air itself seem to vibrate. "Run before I forget your pack and rip out your throats." They ran, disappeared into the gardens like their lives depended on it, which they probably did. Darius sank to his knees on the muddy bank, still holding me against his chest. His hands moved over me, frantically checking for injuries, trying to assess damage while I shook and coughed up river water. "Stay with me." His voice cracked on the words. "Don't you dare just stay with me." I tried to answer, but my teeth were chattering too hard. The cold had seeped into my bones, turning my blood to ice. I couldn't feel my fingers or toes. Couldn't stop the violent trembling racking my body. "Need to get you warm." He was already moving, scooping me up and standing in one fluid motion. "Hold on, just hold on." He ran. Not toward the castle where people would see, where questions would be asked. Toward the old groundskeeper's cottage at the edge of the estate, abandoned for years but still standing. The door gave way with one kick, and then we were inside. Darius set me down just long enough to light the fire that had been laid in the hearth probably years ago, and it caught immediately, casting flickering light across the dusty space. Then his hands were on me again, stripping away my soaked dress with clinical efficiency. I should have been embarrassed, should have protested, but I was too cold, too focused on trying to breathe through the shivers. He wrapped me in his own shirt, still damp but warmer than my sodden clothes, and pulled me against him. His body was like a furnace, and I pressed into it instinctively, seeking heat. "I've got you." His arms locked around me, one hand stroking up and down my back, trying to generate warmth through friction. "I've got you. You're safe." But I wasn't safe, couldn't get warm. My lips were blue, my skin ice pale, and the shaking wouldn't stop no matter how tightly he held me. Your Majesty. My voice came out slurred, wrong. I'm so cold. I know, sweetheart. The endearment fell from his lips unconsciously, and even through my haze I felt the impact of it. Stay awake. Look at me. I tried. God, I tried. But my eyelids were so heavy, and the darkness pulling at the edges of my vision was so tempting. No. His hand cupped my face, rough and desperate. Don't close your eyes. Please. Please don't. But I couldn't fight it anymore. The last thing I felt was his forehead pressing against mine. The last thing I heard was his voice, raw and broken. Don't leave me. I just found you. Then nothing. I woke to heat. Searing, overwhelming heat that surrounded me completely. For a confused moment, I thought I was still in the river, drowning in cold water. But this was different. This was warmth and safety, and the steady thrum of a heartbeat that wasn't my own. I forced my eyes open and found myself pressed against Darius's bare chest, his arms locked around me like he'd never let go. The fire blazed in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across his face. He wasn't looking at the flames. He was looking at me with an expression so raw, so utterly devastated, that it stole what little breath I'd regained. You're awake. The words were barely a whisper. I tried to speak, but my throat was raw from swallowing river water. Instead, I just nodded. Something in his expression cracked. His hand came up to cup my face, that same gentle, devastating touch, and his thumb brushed across my cheekbone like he was confirming I was real. I thought I lost you, he said hoarsely. When you went under and didn't come back up, I thought... He broke off, jaw clenching. How did you know? My voice came out scratchy and weak. How did you know I was there? I felt it. His eyes searched mine, dark and intense. Something pulled at me, like a hook in my chest dragging me toward the river. I didn't question it. I just ran. That didn't make sense. We had no bond, no connection that would let him feel my distress. Unless, I need you to understand something. His voice had dropped lower, intimate in the firelight. What I did pulling you from that water, it wasn't about duty. It wasn't about protecting pack members or doing what's right. Then what was it about? You. The single word hit me like a physical blow. It's always been about you. My breath caught. Darius. I tried to stay away. Tried to convince myself that Adrian would be better for you. That you deserved someone who could give you a normal life without the weight of pack politics and tradition crushing you. I never asked for that. I know. His thumb continued its gentle path across my cheek. But I was trying to protect you from me. From this. His other hand pressed against my ribs, right over my racing heart. From whatever this is that makes me want to burn down the world when someone hurts you. The confession hung between us, dangerous and intoxicating. The kiss, I whispered. At the masquerade. That was you trying to protect me? His laugh was bitter. That was me losing control. I saw you standing there blindfolded. And I knew it was supposed to be Adrian, that you wanted it to be him, but I couldn't stop myself from going to you, from taking what I had no right to take. You had every right. The words escaped before I could stop them. His eyes flared. Don't say that, don't. I cut him off the only way I knew how. I kissed him, pushed up on trembling arms and pressed my mouth to his before fear or logic could stop me. For one heartbeat, he went absolutely still. Then he groaned a sound pulled from somewhere deep and primal and kissed me back. This kiss was different from the first. That one had been controlled, careful despite its intensity. This was desperation. His hand fisted in my hair, angling my head to deepen the kiss. His mouth moved against mine with a hunger that made my toes curl and heat pool low in my belly despite the lingering cold. I gasped, and he took advantage, his tongue sweeping in to claim every inch of my mouth like he was trying to memorize the taste of me. It was the same kiss, the same devastating possession that had unmade me at the masquerade. The realization hit like lightning. I pulled back, breathing hard, staring at him with wide eyes. It was you, I said, at the masquerade. I thought I convinced myself it had to be Adrian, that you'd only done it out of duty or pity or... There was nothing pitiful about that kiss. His voice was rough as gravel. There was nothing dutiful about the way I wanted to kill anyone who'd set up that cruel game. Nothing controlled about how desperately I wanted to kiss you again every second since. Then why did you stay away? Because wanting you doesn't change what you are. The words should have hurt, but the anguish in his voice softened them. You're wolfless, human. The pack will never accept. I don't care about the pack. The words shocked us both, but they were true. Somewhere between drowning in that river and waking in his arms, something had shifted, clarified. I'd spent my whole life trying to be enough, trying to earn acceptance from wolves who would never see past what I lacked, and I was done. I care about you, I whispered. Only you. The words hung in the air between us, irreversible and terrifying. Darius went absolutely still. His hand was still buried in my hair, his body pressed against mine, but I felt the moment the walls started to rebuild. Saw the shutters coming down over his eyes. No. I grabbed his face before he could pull away, forcing him to look at me. Don't you dare retreat now. Not after everything. You don't know what you're saying. But his voice lacked conviction. I know exactly what I'm saying. My thumb traced the sharp line of his jaw. I'm saying that I don't care if the pack accepts me. I've never been accepted. I've been tolerated at best, tormented at worst. But you... My voice cracked. You see me. Not what I lack. Not what I can't do. Just me. You deserve more than... Stop telling me what I deserve. The words came out fiercer than intended. Stop deciding for me. I've had a lifetime of people making choices about my worth, about my place. I'm done letting others define what I can or can't have. Something in his expression shifted, softened. You're shaking. I was. But not from cold anymore. Come here. He pulled me back against his chest, wrapping his arms around me. The embrace was different now, less about warming me up, more about holding on. We need to talk about this. Really talk. But not tonight. Tonight you need rest. I'm not tired. A lie. Exhaustion was pulling at me like an undertow. His chest rumbled with something between a laugh and a sigh. Stubborn, says the man who's been avoiding me for weeks. Touché. He pressed a kiss to the top of my head, and the casual affection of it made my heart stutter. Sleep. I'll keep the fire going. We'll figure this out in the morning. I wanted to argue, wanted to keep talking, keep holding on to this moment where the truth sat raw and honest between us. But my body had other ideas. The warmth, the safety, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath my ear. It all conspired to drag me under. I fell asleep in the arms of the Alpha King, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged somewhere. I woke to sunlight streaming through the cottage's dirty windows and an empty space where Darius had been. Panic spiked through me before I saw the note weighed down on the small table by a clean dress one of mine from the castle. Went to deal with the she-wolves. You're not going back to servants' quarters. This isn't over, D. My fingers traced over the sharp letters, a smile tugging at my mouth despite everything. This wasn't over. I dressed quickly, noting the care he'd taken to bring me clothes, shoes, even a cloak. The walk back to the castle felt surreal, like I'd left as one person and was returning as someone entirely different. The servants' entrance was bustling with morning activity, but conversations died as I passed. Eyes tracked me with new speculation. Word had clearly spread about something, though I wasn't sure how much they knew. Marie caught my arm as I headed toward the stairs. Where have you been? There are rumors flying everywhere. Something about the river and... She lowered her voice. The king going absolutely feral on some noble she-wolves. It's complicated. I'll bet. Her eyes gleamed with curiosity and concern. Be careful. The prince has been looking for you. My stomach dropped. Adrian? He's been asking everyone where you are. Seemed pretty determined to find you. I didn't have time to process that before Adrian's voice rang out across the hall. There you are. He strode toward me with that easy confidence, but something was different. His smile seemed forced. His eyes held an edge I'd never noticed before. Your Highness. I stepped back instinctively as he reached for my hand. Adrian, he corrected, catching my fingers before I could retreat further. We need to talk, privately. I don't think… Please. The word sounded reasonable, but his grip on my hand was firm enough to border on uncomfortable. Just a few minutes. Marie shot me a concerned look, but Adrian was already guiding me toward one of the small sitting rooms off the main hall. The door closed behind us with a soft click that felt far too final. What's this about? I pulled my hand free, creating space between us. Adrian's pleasant expression finally cracked. You tell me. I hear you nearly drowned last night, that my brother pulled you from the river and then disappeared with you for hours. He saved my life. Did he? Adrian moved closer, and I was suddenly aware of how much larger he was, how the easy charm had evaporated, leaving something harder underneath. Or did he create a situation where he could play hero? Darius has always been good at manipulation. That's not what happened. Then what did happen? His eyes narrowed. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like my brother has been circling you for weeks, moving pieces around to isolate you, make you dependent on him. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? He laughed, but there was no humor in it. I've known Darius my whole life. He's calculating, strategic. Everything he does serves a purpose. Stop. Anger flared hot in my chest. You don't get to twist this into something ugly. I'm trying to protect you. He reached for me again and I sidestepped. Whatever he told you last night, whatever he promised, he can't follow through. The pack won't accept a wolf, and as human, as anything more than a servant. Especially not as… He stopped, jaw tightening. As what? I challenged. As his. The words came out bitter. That's what this is about, isn't it? He kissed you at the masquerade. I should have known when he went silent afterward, when he started watching you like a starving wolf. My heart kicked. How did you… I'm not blind. Adrian's mask was fully gone now, replaced by something petulant and entitled. I saw the way you looked after that kiss, the way you floated around like someone had handed you the world. I assumed it was me, that you'd finally gotten what you'd been mooning over for months. The words hit like a slap. I never… Please. He waved a hand dismissively. You followed me around with those big, hopeful eyes, blushed whenever I spoke to you. It was sweet, really, flattering, and you encouraged it. The realization settled cold in my stomach. All those kind words, those smiles. You knew how I felt, and you used it. I was being nice to a lonely servant girl. He shrugged. Was I supposed to ignore you? You were supposed to be honest. Like Darius has been honest? Adrian's laugh was sharp. He's been lying to you from the start, making you think he's some noble protector when really he's just claiming territory. That's not true, isn't it? He stepped closer, backing me toward the wall. Tell me something. Did he explain why the pack laws exist? Why an alpha king can't just choose whoever he wants? It doesn't matter. It matters completely. Adrian's hand came up to rest against the wall beside my head. Not threatening, but definitely caging. Without a wolf, you can't bond. Can't strengthen the pack. Can't give him heirs who'll carry the alpha bloodline. You'd be his weakness. A liability he'd have to protect constantly while the pack questions his judgment and his fitness to rule. Each word was a carefully placed knife, designed to cut where I was most vulnerable. He knows all of this, Adrian continued, voice dropping to something almost gentle, which means he's either lying to you about his intentions, or he's willing to destroy everything our family has built for centuries. Either way, you lose. You're wrong. But my voice wavered. Am I? He leaned in, and I smelled expensive cologne mixed with something sour underneath. Desperation. Because I could give you everything he can't. I'm not bound by the same laws. As the second son, I have freedom he'll never have. I could court you properly, make you mine without the pack tearing itself apart. I don't want… You wanted me last week. His hand came up to cut my face, mirroring the gesture Darius had made a dozen times, but it felt wrong, invasive. You wanted me before my brother confused you with pretty lies and stolen kisses. I shoved his hand away. Stop touching me. Why? Something ugly flickered across his face. You let him touch you. Let him hold you all night in that cottage. Did you let him do more than that? Did you give him— The door slammed open. Darius stood in the doorway, and the rage rolling off him made the air itself feel heavy. His eyes, God, his eyes were more wolf than human, glowing amber, focused entirely on where Adrian's hand still hovered near my face. Get away from her. Each word was a command threaded with alpha power that made Adrian's wolf instinctively submit, but Adrian fought it, straightened his spine. This is a private conversation, brother. There's nothing private about cornering a woman who's telling you no. Darius moved into the room with predatory grace. I heard her. The whole hallway heard her. So I'll say it one more time. Step away. Adrian's jaw clenched, but he moved, created space between us. I immediately crossed to stand beside Darius, and the relief that flooded his expression was almost painful to witness. This is interesting, Adrian said, regaining some of his composure. The Alpha King, coming to rescue the damsel, very heroic. But what happens after the rescue, Darius? When reality sets in, and you remember that she can't give you what you need? When the pack starts questioning every decision you make because you're too busy protecting your pet human to actually rule? Careful. Darius's voice dropped to something lethal. You're still my brother, but that will only protect you for so long. I'm trying to help her. Adrian gestured toward me. Trying to make her see that you're offering a fantasy. I'm offering something real. You're offering scraps. Darius's hand found mine, lacing our fingers together in a gesture so public, so deliberately possessive, that Adrian's eyes widened. Stolen moments and secret meetings because you don't have the spine to claim anything openly. And you do? Adrian challenged. You're really going to stand before the pack and claim her? Make her your what? Your mate? Your queen? They'll revolt. Then let them try. The words rang through the room like a bell. Adrian stared at his brother. You've lost your mind. Maybe. Darius's thumb stroked across my knuckles, gentle despite the violence humming beneath his skin. Or maybe I've finally found something worth fighting for. She's not worth your crown. She's worth more than 100 crowns. Darius pulled me closer, until I was tucked against his side. And you're done speaking to her, done looking at her, done pretending you offer anything but your own wounded pride. This isn't over, Adrian said, but he was already backing toward the door. When this falls apart, and it will, don't expect me to pick up the pieces. He left, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the frame. Silence flooded the room. Darius's hand was still wrapped around mine, his grip almost too tight, like he was afraid I'd disappear if he loosened it. Are you all right? His voice had returned to that rough gentleness I was beginning to crave. I'm fine. He didn't hurt me. He tried to manipulate you. Darius turned me to face him, eyes searching mine with desperate intensity. Everything he said about the pack laws, about me not being able to follow through. I don't care. You should. He cupped my face with both hands. You should care that choosing me means choosing a war. That the pack will fight this. That your life will become infinitely harder. I already told you. I placed my hands over his, holding him there. I'm done letting others decide my worth. If the pack wants to fight, let them fight. But I'm not walking away from this. From you. Something in his expression cracked open. You mean that? Every word. He kissed me then. Not the desperate passion from the cottage. Not the claiming possession of the masquerade. This was a promise. Soft and reverent and absolutely certain. When he pulled back, his forehead rested against mine. Say my name. What? My name. Not your majesty or Alpha King. I need to hear you say my name. Understanding bloomed. This was him, letting down the final wall, giving me the man beneath the crown. Darius, I whispered. His eyes closed like I'd given him something sacred. Again. Darius. Once more. Darius. He kissed me again, swallowing my voice, my name for him, like it was oxygen. And I knew we both knew that everything had just irrevocably changed. I hadn't begged, hadn't pleaded, or grasped at him desperately. I'd simply chosen, and he'd chosen me right back. The Wolf Ball happened once a decade, a gathering of every major pack in the northern kingdoms. Alphas, betas, warriors, and nobles descended on our territory for 3 days of politics, posturing, and power plays disguised as celebration. It was the worst possible time for Darius to make a statement, which, of course, was exactly when he chose to do it. "You don't have to do this," I said for the 100th time, staring at the dress laid out on my bed. Not the simple servant's garb I'd worn my entire life. This was deep crimson silk that shimmered like fire in the lamplight, cut to fit a queen. We could wait, find a better time when there will never be a better time. Darius stood behind me, his presence filling my small room in the guest wing where he'd moved me 3 days ago. And waiting only gives those who oppose us more time to scheme. Those who oppose us include most of your pack. I turned to face him. The visiting alphas, your advisors, probably half the kingdom. Probably. He reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear with that devastating gentleness. "Does that change how you feel?" "No." The answer was immediate, certain. "But I don't want you to lose everything because of me. You are everything." His thumb traced my jaw. "The crown means nothing if I have to spend my life pretending you don't exist, hiding what you are to me. And what am I to you?" I needed to hear him say it, needed the words spoken aloud before we walked into that ballroom and faced the consequences. His eyes held mine, amber bright and absolutely certain. "You're my mate, my chosen. The other half of my soul that I didn't know was missing until I kissed you, and everything finally made sense." My breath caught. "But I can't be your mate. I don't have a wolf. There's no bond, no, there's something." He pressed my hand to his chest, right over his heart. "I feel you here, every moment. Your fear, your hope, your stubborn determination. I felt you drowning in that river from across the estate. Tell me that's not a bond." I couldn't. Because I'd felt it too, that inexplicable pull toward him that had nothing to do with logic or wolf magic. That went deeper than instinct. "The ancient texts talk about true mates," he continued. "Bonds that transcend pack law and bloodlines. Connections that exist beyond what we understand. I think," he paused, vulnerability flickering across his face. "I think you're mine. However impossible that should be, then why can't anyone else feel it? Maybe they can't recognize what they've never seen before." His other hand came up to cup my face. "Or maybe our bond is ours alone, not for the pack to validate or approve, just ours." The words settled into my chest like truth. "Get dressed," he said softly. "Let me show them what choosing really looks like." He left me alone to prepare, though I felt his presence just beyond the door, guarding me even now. Marie came to help with the dress, her hands shaking as she laced up the back. "Everyone's talking," she whispered. "About you and the king, about what he's planning to do tonight." "What are they saying?" "That he's gone mad, that you've bewitched him somehow." She met my eyes in the mirror. "But I've watched you for years. Watched him watching you. This isn't madness. It's the first honest thing I've seen from the nobility in ages." "Thank you," I whispered. She squeezed my shoulder. "Give them hell." The ballroom was packed when we arrived. Every pack represented, hundreds of wolves in their finest, the air thick with political tension and barely concealed hostility. Music played from the gallery, but no one was dancing. They were all waiting. For him, for the Alpha King to make his entrance and begin the formal proceedings. I stood in the antechamber with my heart trying to beat out of my chest. Through the crack in the door, I could see the raised dais where Darius would stand, the ancient stone circle at the center of the floor where rituals had been performed for centuries. "Ready?" Darius appeared beside me, dressed in formal black that made him look every inch the king he was. Powerful, untouchable, except his hand found mine, fingers lacing together, and I felt the slight tremor in his grip. He was nervous. The unshakable Alpha King was actually nervous. "What if they reject this?" I asked quietly. What if they demand you choose someone else? Then I abdicate. His answer was immediate, certain. Darius no. I won't rule without you. He turned to face me fully. I spent 30 years doing my duty, being what everyone needed me to be. Cold, controlled, perfectly acceptable, and I was miserable. I didn't even realize how miserable until you. I'm not worth your crown. You're worth 1,000 crowns. He kissed my forehead. And I'm done pretending otherwise. So we walk in there together, and we let them see exactly who I choose, who chooses me back. The doors opened. A herald's voice rang out. His Majesty, Alpha King Darius of the Northern Reach. Every head turned toward the entrance. Darius didn't let go of my hand. Instead, he raised it, tucking it into the crook of his elbow, and led me forward, into the light, into the starries, into a silence so complete I could hear my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. We walked down the central aisle together, my crimson dress a beacon against his dark clothing. I felt every eye on us, heard the sharp intakes of breath, the whispered, "Is that," and "He can't possibly," and "wolfless human." Darius's jaw was set, his spine straight, his stride unwavering. He led me all the way to the dais and turned to face the assembled crowd. "You're wondering," he said, voice carrying to every corner of the massive room, "why I've brought her, why the wolfless servant stands at my side wearing my colors." The silence was deafening. Some of you believe I've lost my mind, that I've been compromised or manipulated. His hand tightened on mine. You're wrong. What I've lost is my willingness to pretend. What I've found is something worth more than political convenience or bloodline purity. An older alpha in the front, someone important based on the deference shown to him, stepped forward. "Your Majesty, with respect, pack law is clear. A mate bond requires—" "I know what it requires," Darius cut him off. "And I'm telling you that the bond exists anyway, not because she has a wolf, not because it fits your understanding of how these things work, but because I feel it. Here." He pressed his free hand to his chest. "Every moment of every day." "That's impossible," someone called from the crowd. "Is it?" Darius's eyes scanned the room, daring anyone to challenge him. "Our ancestors spoke of true mates, bonds that transcend normal pack mechanics, connections written into the fabric of fate itself. We've dismissed those stories as legends, but perhaps we were wrong. Even if that's true," another voice argued, "she can't strengthen the pack, can't provide heirs with alpha blood. You'd be tying yourself to someone who makes us weaker." I felt the words like physical blows, but Darius's grip on my hand never wavered. "Strength," he said quietly, "isn't just about bloodlines and shifting. It's about courage. About facing impossible odds and choosing to fight anyway." He turned to look at me, and the raw honesty in his expression made my eyes burn. "This woman has more courage in her smallest finger than most of you have in your entire bodies. She survived in a world that told her every day she wasn't enough. She's endured cruelty and isolation and still chose kindness. Still chose to see the best in others even when they showed her their worst." He turned back to the crowd. "So yes, I choose her. Openly, permanently. And if any of you have a problem with that, you're welcome to challenge me for leadership. Here, now. I'll fight every single one of you if that's what it takes." The threat hung in the air. No one moved, because everyone in that room knew that Darius was the most powerful alpha in the northern kingdoms. Challenging him was suicide. "Since there are no challengers," Darius continued, "we move to the claiming right." Shock rippled through the crowd. The claiming right was sacred, witnessed by the pack to validate a mate bond. It involved marking a bite that would leave a permanent scar, visible proof of the bond. But it required the mark to take, required the magic to recognize the bond and seal it. If I was truly his mate, the mark would hold. If not, it would fade within minutes, proving him wrong in front of everyone. "Your Majesty," an advisor stepped forward, voice tight with concern. "If the mark doesn't take, it will." Darius led me to the center of the stone circle, and the crowd pressed closer, forming a ring around us. "I've never been more certain of anything," He turned me to face him, hands gentle on my shoulders. "You can still say no," he murmured, quiet enough that only I could hear. "Walk away. I'll tell them I was wrong, and you'll be free of this. Free of me. I don't want to be free of you." The words came out steady despite my racing heart. "I choose this. Choose you, however terrifying that is." Something fierce and possessive flared in his eyes. "Then kneel." I sank to my knees on the cold stone, aware of every watching eye, every judgment being passed. But I kept my gaze locked on Darius, on my king, on my mate. He knelt with me, his hand sliding into my hair, tilting my head to expose my throat. The most vulnerable position possible. Complete trust. Complete surrender. "This is going to hurt," he whispered. "I know. And if it doesn't take, it will." I pressed my hand over his heart, feeling the wild thunder of it. "I feel you too. Have felt you since that first kiss, maybe before." His eyes closed briefly, and when they opened, they glowed pure amber, his wolf rising to the surface. "Mine," he growled, and the word resonated with ancient power that made the air itself shimmer. Then he struck. His teeth sank into the curve of my neck and shoulder, and pain exploded through me, white-hot and all-consuming. I gasped, fingers clutching at his shoulders, but I didn't pull away. Couldn't pull away, because beneath the pain, something else was building. A warmth that started at the bite and spread through my entire body like liquid fire. My vision blurred, and I could have sworn I felt something massive and powerful wrapping around me. Protection, possession, home. The bond snapped into place with such force that I cried out, and Darius's arms locked around me, holding me steady as magic I'd never possessed, suddenly flooded my system. When he finally released me, pulling back to check the mark, his eyes widened. I felt it too. Felt the wound healing already but not disappearing, transforming into a scar that shimmered with an iridescent quality like moonlight made permanent. The mark had taken. Gasps echoed around the circle. Because this wasn't just a mark. This was a true mate bond, visible and undeniable. Darius's hand touched my neck reverently, tracing the scar that proved I was his. "I can feel you," he breathed. "Everything. Your emotions. Your thoughts. Your—" He broke off, overwhelmed. "I feel you too." And I did. Felt his fierce joy, his relief, his absolute certainty that this was right. Felt the bond thrumming between us like a living thing. He helped me stand, and I swayed slightly, dizzy from the rush of new sensations. But I felt powerful, chosen, whole. Darius turned to face the still shocked crowd, keeping me tucked against his side. "Any questions?" Silence. Then, slowly, the older alpha who'd spoken before stepped forward and impossibly knelt. My alpha king, my queen. One by one, every wolf in that room followed suit, kneeling before their king. And before me, the wolfless human who'd somehow become their queen. I felt Darius's pride and love flooding through the bond, wrapping around me like the most precious gift. "They accept you," he murmured. "They accept us," I corrected. He kissed me then, in front of everyone, claiming my mouth with the same devastating certainty he'd shown from the very beginning. And I kissed him back, pouring everything I felt through the bond, every ounce of love and trust and impossible hope. When we finally broke apart, the room erupted into applause and howls. The wolf ball had just witnessed the impossible, and the impossible had won. The days that followed the wolf ball blurred together in a cascade of change, so swift it left me breathless. Celeste and her companions were banished from court within hours of the claiming. Darius didn't rage or make a spectacle of it. He simply had them escorted to the border with orders never to return. Their families, desperate to maintain their standing, didn't protest. Couldn't protest when their daughters had tried to murder the newly crowned queen. I should have felt vindicated, triumphant even. Instead, I just felt tired of the cruelty that had defined so much of my life here. "Let it go," Darius murmured one evening as we stood on the balcony outside our chambers. Our chambers. Still a concept I was adjusting to. He pulled me back against his chest, arms wrapping around my waist. I can feel you dwelling on them through the bond. I'm not dwelling, I'm just… I paused, trying to find the right words. I spent so long being invisible to them. Now they're gone, and it feels strange. Strange how? Empty. Like I expected some grand moment of justice, but instead it's just… quiet. His lips brushed my temple. Sometimes quiet is the best revenge. They wanted you broken and worthless. Instead, you're standing here wearing a crown they'll never touch. I leaned into him, feeling the truth of his words settle. When did you get so wise? I've always been wise. You just never noticed because you were too busy mooning over my idiot brother. I elbowed him lightly, earning a low chuckle that vibrated through his chest into mine. Adrian was a different problem entirely. He'd left the morning after the wolf ball without a word to anyone, and Darius had let him go. But 2 weeks later, a formal decree had been issued. Prince Adrian was removed from succession, his titles intact, but his claim to the throne severed permanently. He'll hate you for this, I'd said when Darius showed me the document. He already hates me. Darius had signed his name with steady strokes, but he proved himself unworthy. Not because of you, though trying to manipulate you is damning enough, but because he lacks the integrity to lead. The pack deserves better. The decree also established new laws. Protections for those without wolves, requirements for consent in all pack bondings, penalties for cruelty based on bloodline or status. The kingdom didn't just stabilize after our claiming. It transformed. And somehow, impossibly, I was at the center of it all. You're thinking too hard again, Darius said, pulling me from my thoughts. I can literally feel the wheels turning. We were in our private sitting room now, a month after the wolf ball, and I was curled against him on the sofa while he worked through correspondence. Or tried to. His hand kept finding its way into my hair, playing with the strands in an absent gesture that made focusing on anything else nearly impossible. I'm thinking about how strange this all is, I admitted. A month ago, I was scrubbing floors and dodging insults. Now I gestured vaguely at the opulent room, the crown sitting on the mantel, the reality of everything that had changed. Now you're exactly where you always belonged. He set aside the papers he'd been ignoring anyway, and shifted me fully into his lap. Though I'll admit, I miss watching you work sometimes. I raised an eyebrow. You miss watching me scrub floors? I miss watching you do anything. His hand curved around my jaw, thumb brushing my lower lip. You have no idea how many council meetings I sat through thinking about the way you looked in the library, or the gardens, or literally anywhere I happened to catch a glimpse of you. That's incredibly distracting behavior for a king. You're incredibly distracting. He leaned in, breath warm against my mouth. Still are. I'm considering banning you from council meetings because I can't concentrate when you're there. You can't ban your own queen from council meetings. Watch me. I laughed, and he swallowed the sound with a kiss that started gentle and quickly turned heated. His hand fisted in my hair, angling my head for better access, and I melted into him the way I always did. The bond hummed between us, content, satisfied, absolutely certain this was right. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Darius rested his forehead against mine. I need to tell you something, he said quietly. My heart kicked. What? That night, the masquerade. I didn't plan to kiss you. I know. You've said… No, I mean I actively planned not to. His eyes met mine, vulnerable in the firelight. I'd convinced myself that staying away was the right thing, that letting you believe in Adrian was kinder than offering you something the pack would fight. What changed? I saw you standing there, blindfolded, waiting for someone who didn't deserve you to claim something he'd never truly value. His hand tightened in my hair, and I couldn't do it, couldn't let him have even that moment with you. So I walked over and I kissed you like I'd been dying to for months, and everything I'd been telling myself shattered. You never told me that part. I was ashamed. He pulled back enough to look at me properly. I'd built my entire reputation on control, on doing what was right over what I wanted, and I threw it all away for one kiss. Just one kiss? I traced the line of his jaw. Seems like you got more than that out of the deal. I got everything. The words were fierce, certain. I got you. The bond. A future I didn't think I was allowed to have. All because I was selfish enough to steal one kiss. It wasn't stealing if I kissed you back. You thought I was Adrian. For about 3 seconds. I smiled at his surprised expression. Then your mouth was on mine, and I knew. Maybe not consciously, but somewhere deep down I recognized you. His eyes darkened. Say that again. I recognized you, I whispered. My mate, my king, mine. He kissed me again, and this time there was no holding back. No careful control, just raw need and fierce possession, and the kind of passion that made the bond flare so bright I could almost see it. When we finally came up for air, tangled together on the sofa with his hand possessively spread across my ribs and my fingers buried in his hair, I couldn't help but laugh. What? He murmured against my neck. I was just thinking about that night. How terrified I was. How certain I was that I'd been kissed by a prince who'd finally noticed me. And instead? Instead, I'd been kissed by a king who'd been watching me all along. I pulled back to meet his eyes. I was never kissed by the wrong man, Darius. I was kissed by the only one who ever truly saw me. His expression softened into something so tender it made my chest ache. I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you know you're seen, valued, loved beyond measure. That's a pretty big promise. Good thing I'm planning on forever. Outside, the kingdom settled into twilight. Wolves moved through the halls, going about their lives under the rule of a king who'd chosen love over tradition, and a queen who'd proven that worth had nothing to do with bloodlines. Inside, in the warmth of our chambers, Darius held me close while the bond thrummed between us like a heartbeat, and for the first time in my life, I felt completely, utterly, impossibly whole. Not because I'd gained a wolf, not because I wore a crown, but because I'd been seen, chosen, claimed by someone who loved every part of me, even the parts I'd been taught to hide. I love you, I whispered into the growing darkness. I know, he whispered back. I can feel it, every moment of every day, and I love you more. That's not possible. Then I'll spend eternity proving you wrong. He kissed me again, sealing the promise with his mouth, his hands, his whole heart, and somewhere deep in my soul, in a place that had been empty and aching for 22 years, something finally settled into perfect, permanent peace. I was home. The end. Thank you for listening to another emotional, magical shifter romance here on Tina Romance Library. If you enjoyed today's story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, so you never miss more powerful, heart-gripping romance stories.